Wow. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming back week after week to listen to these stories. Uh, Whether you're just trying to quiet an anxious mind or you're needing help falling asleep, I hope you find what you're looking for tonight. The story this evening is called The Keeper of Moments. It's quite magical. It takes place in beautiful Prague. There is a dragon, and the main character has kind of lost inspiration. He runs a business that was passed down through generations, and he's lost that spark. And so let's just say the dragon helps him find it again. So I hope you love it. I hope that you're able to just relax for a while and enjoy. Be sure you're in a cozy spot, okay? So that it's safe for you to fall asleep. And take some deep breaths in. And a good technique is breathing in deeply, holding it for 4 seconds, breathing out slowly, holding for 4 seconds, and doing that a few times. Okay, so I'll let you do that on your own. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel if you're loving what you're hearing, and like this story and comment. These are all free ways that you can support my channel, and I appreciate it so much. So enjoy this story this evening, and I'll see you all soon. Bye. In the cobblestone heart of Prague, where the streets wound like threads through the fabric of time, Marek tended to his little clock shop. The sign above the door read, "The House of Time." The shop's window displayed an array of clocks, gilded pocket watches, delicate mantel clocks, and intricate wall timepieces, each lovingly crafted by Marek's hands. The shop had been in Marek's family for generations, passed down like a whispered secret. Marek grew up here, learning the rhythms of gears and pendulums from his father, who spoke of time as though it were alive. Every clock has its own soul, his father used to say, leaning over a tiny mechanism with a loop perched on his nose. Treat it well, and it will never betray you. Marek loved the precision of his craft, the satisfying click of a gear sliding into place, the soft whir as a mechanism sprang to life. He adored the way a clock's rhythm could bring order to a chaotic world. When he worked, the outside noise of the city faded away. In its place was the steady, soothing tick of time itself, unfolding with a grace that felt almost eternal. Yet something had changed. Lately, the tick-tock of his clocks felt hollow. The intricate designs that once filled him with pride now seemed mechanical, their beauty dulled by routine. He spent his days hunched over his workbench, his fingers deftly adjusting springs and screws, but his heart was elsewhere. Marek couldn't pinpoint when the feeling had begun. Perhaps it was when the young couple who lived above his shop moved away, leaving their laughter and violin music behind. Or when he noticed how the tourists passing his window rarely stopped to admire his creations, their faces glued to the glowing screens instead. Or perhaps it was simply the weight of the years pressing down on him, the quiet knowledge that time, for all its precision, could not be rewound. He missed something, though he couldn't say what. He longed for a spark, for something to wake him from the quiet haze that had settled over his days. His evenings were no better. He would sit by the window in his small apartment above the shop, watching the golden lights of Prague reflect on the Vltava River, feeling like a shadow in a city bursting with life. One autumn evening, as Marek locked up the shop, the chill in the air seemed sharper than usual. He pulled his coat tighter around him and hesitated on the threshold. Normally, he would head upstairs, make a simple dinner, and read until the pull of sleep overtook him. But tonight, something in the air felt different. The sound of the Vltava River, usually so distant, seemed to whisper to him, carrying a melody that was both strange and familiar. The Charles Bridge loomed in the distance, its statues bathed in the soft amber glow of the streetlights. Marek felt his feet carry him toward the bridge, as if drawn by an invisible thread. He passed the street musicians packing up their instruments, and the last of the market stalls closing for the night. The city seemed quieter than usual. Its usual buzz dimmed to a gentle hum. Reaching the middle of the bridge, Marek leaned against the stone railing and gazed down at the water. The surface shimmered like molten gold, rippling softly in the moonlight. It was beautiful, but Marek's chest tightened with the same unnameable longing. He closed his eyes and let the cool breeze wash over him. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, as though the city itself was holding its breath. And then, just on the edge of his hearing, he thought he caught the faintest sound. A deep, resonant hum, like the vibration of a giant bell. When he opened his eyes, the river seemed to glow brighter, its light flickering as if alive. Marek straightened, his pulse quickening. He glanced around, but the bridge was empty, save for the statues standing watch. The sound came again, low and rhythmic, a pulse that seemed to echo through his very bones. It wasn't frightening, it was calming, almost meditative, like a heartbeat reminding him of something he had forgotten. Marek stood there for a long while, listening, his mind strangely still. The longing in his chest softened, replaced by something quieter. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt the first stirrings of a spark, as if time itself had shifted just enough to let something extraordinary slip through. When he finally returned to his shop, the clocks seemed to tick a little louder, their rhythms almost alive. Marek lay in bed that night, the sound of the river echoing in his mind. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The next evening, Marek found himself drawn to the Charles Bridge once more. He couldn't explain it. Something about the stillness of the river and the hum he had heard the night before lingered in his thoughts, like the refrain of an unfinished song. His clocks had ticked with an unfamiliar energy all day, and though he worked as usual, his focus was elsewhere. As the city's lights began to sparkle in the twilight, Marek closed his shop early and made his way toward the bridge. The air was brisk, and the faint scent of roasting chestnuts from a distant vendor mingled with the damp stone of the streets. This time, the bridge was even quieter. The tourists were gone, and only the statues stood sentinel in the growing darkness. Marek leaned on the railing where he had stood the night before, gazing down at the river. The water shimmered with an otherworldly light, as though the stars had fallen into its depths. The ripples glowed faintly, and Marek noticed something he hadn't before: a soft, pulsing rhythm beneath the surface, a golden glow that moved like a heartbeat. Marek tilted his head, his brow furrowing. He leaned closer, the chill of the stone railing seeping into his palms. And as he watched, the light began to shift, gathering into a shape. The shape was fluid at first, indistinct, like the reflection of something vast and hidden beneath the waves. But slowly, as the river itself was revealing a secret, the glow took form. It was a dragon, but not like any dragon Marek had imagined in the old legends. This dragon was made of light, its body a cascade of shimmering gold and deep sapphire hues, as if it were woven from the very essence of the river and sky. Its scales seemed to ripple with each pulse of light, and its wings, though folded closed, shimmered faintly, as though they could dissolve into mist at any moment. The dragon's gaze turned downward, drawing Marek's eyes back to the water. Beneath the surface, he saw faint, glowing threads of light weaving through the current, forming intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. He realized they weren't random. They were stories, moments of the city captured and flowing through the river. carried by its endless journey. The dragon was part of this weave, not separate but connected, its presence both ancient and immediate. Marek could almost hear the whispers of the stories, laughters in a cafe, a child's first steps, the quiet resolve of an artist sketching in the square. He was so mesmerized that he didn't notice the dragon had drawn closer until its luminous head rested near the surface of the water just below him. Its breath rippled the river, sending tiny waves lapping against the stones. Marek hesitated, then extended his hand toward the dragon. He was too far from his touch, but for the first time in years, Marek's longing seemed to soften, replaced by a sense of connection. The dragon dipped his head in a slow, deliberate nod, as if to say, "You are part of this too." And then, just as quietly as it had appeared, the dragon began to dissolve back into the river, its form melting into threads of light that disappeared beneath the surface. Marek stood there, his breath caught, his hand still outstretched. The glow faded, but the dragon's presence lingered in the air, a quiet that seemed to settle into the stones of the bridge and the current of the river. Marek watched until the last trace of light was gone, and then slowly turned and began walking back to his shop. He didn't understand what he had seen, but he knew one thing. His world had changed. And as he lay in bed that night, the memory of the dragon's golden glow stayed with him, filling the quiet moments between the ticking of his clocks with a warmth he had not felt in years. For the first time in a long time, Marek dreamed, not of gears and springs, but what this magical encounter truly meant. This couldn't be by chance. Marek woke to the soft chime of his wall clock, its sound delicate yet firm, as though reminding him that time was both a gift and a mystery. He lay still for a moment, staring at the plastered ceiling of his small apartment, letting the memory of the previous night wash over him. The dragon, the river, the glowing threads of light. It was impossible, yet it had happened. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to see it again. The day stretched ahead of him, quiet and unhurried, as most days were in the House of Time. Marek dressed in his usual attire, soft wool trousers, a linen shirt, and his favorite waistcoat. Worn and a little faded, but familiar as an old friend. After a quick breakfast of tea and bread, he descended the narrow staircase to his shop below. The familiar smell of metal and polish greeted him, mingled with the faint scent of cedar wood from the drawer of spare parts near his workbench. The shop was small but cozy, with shelves lined with clocks of every size and style. Sunlight streamed through the front window, catching the brass and glass of the clocks and casting tiny rainbows onto the wall. Marek began his morning routine, winding the clocks and listening to their distinct rhythms. Each had its own voice, the steady, authoritative tick of the grandfather clock, the delicate, almost playful chime of a mantelpiece clock. Usually this ritual grounded him, but today his mind wandered. He thought of the dragon, the way its glowing eyes seemed to see him. He thought of the light weaving through the river, how it seemed to carry stories, histories, and moments that had been forgotten or overlooked. The memory filled him with a quiet wonder, but also a question. Why me? Was it chance that had drawn him to the bridge last night, or something more deliberate? The dragon had looked at him as though it understood something about him. He didn't yet understand himself. The shop bell jingled, breaking his thoughts. A young woman entered, her scarf wrapped tightly against the November chill. She smiled as she placed a small pocket watch on the counter. The chain tangled like a knotted thread. "Can you fix it?" she asked, her voice soft as though speaking too loudly would disturb the delicate silence of the shop. Marek nodded. "Of course. Give me a moment." As he worked, his fingers deftly untangled the chain, and resetting the mechanism, he thought of the dragon again. He imagined the glow of its scales, the way it seemed to move like water and light combined. And for the first time in a long time, Marek felt a flicker of excitement, as though he were on the cusp of discovering something profound. He finished with the young woman's watch, and she thanked him and left. The shop fell silent once more. Marek returned to his workbench, adjusting a tiny gear in an ornate clock that had come to him for repair. Yet, even as he worked, his thoughts were elsewhere, and he found himself glancing at the window, watching the light shift as the day wore on. As evening approached, Marek closed the shop earlier than usual. He told himself it was to avoid the evening chill, but in truth, he was eager to return to the bridge. He brewed a quick pot of tea and sipped it slowly, watching the city lights begin to twinkle outside his window. Before leaving, Marek pulled a small satchel from his closet and placed a few items inside: a sketchbook, a pencil, and a silver pocket watch his father had given him years ago. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to bring these things, but the weight of the watch in his pocket felt reassuring, as if it might serve as a bridge between his past and whatever he was about to encounter. The walk to the Charles Bridge felt different tonight. The air was still, the sounds of the city muted as though the world itself was waiting. Marek passed the familiar statues and lanterns, their glow soft and golden in the deepening twilight. The river below seemed calmer than usual, its surface smooth and dark, reflecting the lights of the bridge like scattered stars. As he reached the spot where he had seen the dragon, Marek's heart quickened. He placed his satchel on the stone railing and leaned over, his eyes searching the water for any sign of the golden glow. The river remained quiet, but Marek wasn't discouraged. He had the sense that the dragon would not appear simply because he wished it to. It would come when the moment was right. So he waited. The sounds of the city faded into the background. The occasional footsteps of passerby, the soft lapping of the river against the stone embankments. Marek opened his sketchbook and began to draw, his pencil moving lightly over the page. He didn't consider himself much of an artist, but the memory of the dragon's form was vivid in his mind. And then, just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the rooftops, Marek saw it. A faint golden glow beneath the surface of the water, growing brighter with each passing moment. His breath caught and his pencil stilled. The dragon was coming. The golden glow beneath the river grew brighter, rippling outward until it seemed to illuminate the entire Charles Bridge. The statues above Marek stood sentinel, their shadows stretching long against the stone, as if they too were watching. Marek leaned closer, his fingers gripping the cool, damp railing. The hum he had heard before returned, deeper and more resonant, vibrating through the air like a distant choir. The water shimmered. From its depths rose the dragon, its radiant form emerging with a grace that defied the weight of time. But tonight, it was different. The dragon didn't simply rise, it soared upward in a sudden breathtaking motion, droplets of water cascading off its glowing scales like shards of light. Its wings unfurled, impossibly vast, each one a shimmering tapestry of golden threads woven with hues of sapphire and emerald. The patterns on its wings seemed alive, shifting like the current of the river itself. Marek stumbled back, his heart pounding. The dragon hovered above the water, its form both luminous and solid, as if it were a being of pure energy, held together by some ancient magic. Its eyes, deep pools of light, locked onto Marek with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Before Marek could even begin to comprehend what was happening, the dragon spoke. Not with words, but with a resonance that filled the air and his mind at once. "You see me." The voice was ancient, layered with countless echoes, as if it carried the weight of centuries. Marek opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He simply nodded, his breath shallow, his chest tight with a mix of awe and disbelief. The dragon's gaze softened, and its body shifted, folding its great wings until they draped over the river like shimmering curtains. The water beneath it stilled, reflecting its radiant form as though the river itself was in awe. "Few have noticed the threads," the dragon continued, its voice a melody that seemed to resonate with the ticking of time. "The stories that weave this city together, fewer still have stopped to listen," said the dragon. Mark felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, and when he blinked, he no longer saw the dragon before him. Instead, he saw Prague, not as it was now, but as it had been through the ages. He saw craftsmen carving the statues that now adorned the bridge, their hands covered in dust, but their hearts full of purpose. He saw lovers meeting in secret, their whispered promises floating on the night air. He saw soldiers crossing the bridge, their faces solemn, their footsteps echoing through time. And then he saw something else. He saw himself. He was sitting at his workbench, the faint glow of lamplight illuminating his face. As he adjusted the tiny gears of a clock. But this wasn't a memory. It was more than that. He saw the countless hours he had spent creating, pouring pieces of himself into his craft, unaware that the rhythm of his work was part of something greater. The vision faded, and Mark was back on the bridge, the dragon still hovering above the water. Its eyes seemed to hold a question, one that Marek couldn't yet decipher. "I don't understand," Marek said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The dragon tilted his head, and the hum around them deepened. The patterns on its wings shifted into a single image, a glowing clock face. "You are a keeper of time, Marek," the dragon said. "But time is more than gears and hands. It is a river flowing endlessly, carrying stories, moments, and connections. You have the gift to see what others overlook, but you've forgotten how to feel it." Marek's heart clenched. The longing he had felt for so long returned, sharper now, cutting through the wonder of the moment. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice breaking. The dragon unfurled its wings again, and this time it didn't hover. It dove towards Marek, its radiant form enveloping him in a rush of warmth and light. Marek gasped as the world around him dissolved into golden threads, each one humming with life. He was no longer standing on the bridge. He was within the dragon itself, its energy coursing through him like a symphony. He felt the city's pulse, the stories of its people weaving together into an intricate pattern. He saw laughter and sorrow, beginnings and endings, all flowing together in a dance of light. And then, deep within the dragon's heart, Marek saw something he had never expected. A clock. But this was no ordinary clock. It had no hands, no numbers, only shifting patterns of light that moved in harmony with the dragon's wings. Marek reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing the surface. The clock responded, its light surging outward, filling him with a sense of connection so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He realized then that the dragon was not a creature of myth. It was the heart of the city itself, the keeper of its stories, its time, and its soul. And somehow Marek was part of it. When the light finally receded, Marek found himself back on the bridge. The dragon hovered above the water once more, its form dimmer now, as if the exchange had taken something from it. "You will know what to do," the dragon said, its voice softer now. "You are not just a maker of clocks, Marek. You are a keeper of moments, and moments are what make time beautiful." With that, the dragon folded its wings and sank back into the river, its light dissolving into the current until only the faintest glow remained. Marek stood there for a long time, the weight of the moment settling over him. When he finally turned to leave, he felt different, lighter, and more whole. As he walked back to his shop, the hum of the dragon's voice echoed in his mind, a quiet reminder that time was not something to measure, but something to feel. The next morning, Marek woke before the chime of his clock. The city outside his window was quiet, bathed in the soft, silvery light of dawn. He dressed slowly, his movements unhurried, as if savoring the stillness that wrapped himself. He dressed slowly, his movements unhurried, as if savoring the stillness that wrapped itself around him like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, he felt no rush to begin his day. The urgency that had always driven him, the need to fill his hours with productivity, had quieted, replaced by a calm, steady awareness of the present. Downstairs, the house of time seemed to greet him like an old friend. The clocks ticked in harmony, their rhythms weaving a gentle melody that Marek had never fully noticed before. He stood in the center of the room listening, his heart swelling with gratitude. The dragon's words echoed in his mind. You are a keeper of moments. Marek began his workday as he always did, winding clocks and repairing their delicate mechanisms. But now, each movement felt purposeful, almost sacred. As he adjusted a tiny gear in an antique pocket watch, he marveled at how such small, intricate parts could create something so meaningful. It struck him that the clocks were more than tools for measuring time. They were keepers of stories, silent witnesses to the lives they accompanied. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. A young boy stood on the threshold, holding a small wooden clock with one hand while gripping his mother's hand with the other. The clock was simple, its face worn from years of use. It belonged to my grandfather, the boy said, his voice shy but steady. It doesn't work anymore, but my mom says it's special. Can you fix it? Marek smiled warmly and knelt to take the clock. He examined it with care, noting the faded engraving on its back. To Peter, with all my love. This clock has a story, Marek said, glancing up at the boy. Would you like to know it? The boy nodded, his eyes wide with curiosity. Marek set the clock on his workbench and began to repair it, explaining each step as he went. He spoke of the delicate balance required to align the gears, the artistry of the tiny hand-carved details, and the way time itself seemed to flow through the clock like a river. The boy listened intently, his small face glowing with wonder. When Marek finished, the clock's ticking filled the shop, soft but steady, like the heartbeat of a long-lost friend. It's alive again, the boy whispered, cradling the clock in his hands. Marek nodded. It always was. It just needed someone to listen. As the boy and his mother left, Marek felt a deep sense of fulfillment, as though he had done more than repair a clock. He had passed on something intangible but vital, a spark of understanding about the beauty of time. The rest of the day passed in a quiet rhythm, each interaction with new meaning. Marek began to see his customers not just as patrons, but as keepers of their own moments. Each clock a thread in the tapestry of their lives. That time is not measured by its passing, but by the moments we choose to treasure. That night, Marek fell asleep to the steady ticking of his father's pocket watch, its rhythm no longer a reminder of what had been lost, but a celebration of what remained.